Thank you so much for coming, and thanks for being patient with the whole room change. We had to change the rooms for you. There's always problems in life, but there can be problems because for good reasons or for bad reasons. And it was for a good reason. We had too many people to fit in the previous room, so we had to move to accommodate everyone. So thank you so much for all coming and dealing so well with the transition into the new room. And I hope everyone, if people haven't found a seat yet, there's still seats. I really urge people to move in and stop. And if we can also just try to quiet down some of the back chatter. And there's plenty of seats still in the front, in the middle. People should try to move in. There probably are people who are still going to be arriving, and we want to leave the rows and back free for easy exits and also for new people who are arriving. So, yes, I just want to welcome everyone here. My name's Philip Locker, and I am an organizer for Socialist Alternative, which is the organizer of today's Socialism Conference, our Northwest Socialism Conference, and also sponsoring the debate that's taking place now. And as I'm sure everyone knows, we're having a debate with the Tea Party versus Socialist Alternative about the politics and ideas of the Tea Party and socialists, about the nature of the political and economic crisis that U.S. society faces, the economic bailouts that we saw go to Wall Street, the healthcare debate, the immigration debate, and the nature of capitalism and socialism. So I think it's going to be given the enormous attention and discussion and debate that's been taking place in U.S. society around the world in the past year, 2 years, of the economic crisis about is there a crisis of free market capitalism? What is socialism? Is Obama's bailout socialist? Is Obama's healthcare plan socialism? Or what is socialism? These are, and the growth, the rapid growth of the Tea Party and its in opposition to some of the bailout and other policies of Obama. These all provide, I think, a lot of fodder for discussion and debate that I think is crucial for activists, whether they be on the left or on the right, to discuss and consider these ideas. And I hope the discussion, if I can say, I think obviously there's going to be a debate, and we really want this to be a vigorous and lively debate, but we also want to make sure it remains a respectful and civil debate. So I really urge, I'll explain in a second the format, but I really urge all the participants in the audience to really be mindful of that and work with us in making sure this is a democratic debate where all different points of view are heard, and everyone and both sides have a chance to put their views forward, and that we're not interrupting people or insulting anyone's positions. We allow, that there'll be time for audience questions and answers. I'd ask for people to wait until the speakers are done and wait and raise your hand, and I will call on people, time allowing, and people can make brief questions or comments, and we'll have time for both points of view to be equally heard, but on the basis that we work through the democratic procedures that we have. So, just to introduce the speakers, we have Ramy Khalil, who is speaking on behalf of Socialist Alternative. He is a longtime organizer for an activist in the anti-war movement, the anti-globalization movement. Was one of the played a key role in organizing the protests against the World Trade Organization over 10 years ago. Ramy, as part of our organization, Socialist Alternative, helped launch the No to the WTO coalition at the University of Washington and several other schools that organized a student walkout and strike of over 2,000 students against the WTO and their policies of corporate free trade and corporate globalization, and has been really a lifelong activist before then and since then, involved in the anti-war movement and labor movement. And right now it's a graduate student studying history at Western Washington University. He's a regular contributor also to Justice newspaper, which people can check out outside. I have a copy here. Our organization puts this out. And you can also read his articles on our website, www.socialistalternative.org. And our second speaker is Keli Carender. I apologize to Keli in advance. It actually is Carender. Is that right?
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
And Keli is one of the, we're really lucky right here in Seattle, is one of the leading people who launched the Tea Party movement recently, and has been a really prominent activist and advocate for the Tea Party. She blogs at Redistributing Knowledge. .blogspot.com, right? Which you should all check out if people are interested. And has been interviewed on NPR, and the New York Times, and has developed somewhat of a national profile as a representative of the Tea Party. And we're really pleased that she's agreed to have this debate. So please join me in welcoming her also. So as I said, this debate is going to be really, our organization, Social Alternative, is sponsoring this debate. We really see this debate as a discussion about, what's the way forward for working people to defend ourselves against the policies that big business has been putting forward. We've seen attack after attack against big business, from big business. And we think there's room for a really important debate between the ideas of the Tea Party and socialists, particularly with, as I said, the controversy about, is Obama socialist? What is socialism? What is the nature of the economic crisis we've seen? And I think there's a lot we can all learn from that discussion. Now, just briefly, just to say, as I said, the sponsor of this is Socialist Alternative. To explain briefly who we are. We are an anti-war, left-wing political organization, a national organization all across the United States and here in Washington State and a number of cities throughout Washington State. We sponsored today's Socialism 2010 conference, which is a Washington State and Northwest conference. We've been really active in building the movement against budget cuts. This past year, there's been throughout the country, a major state budget crisis in light of the economic crisis, where states across the country have been radically slashing social spending, public services, and public education. And there's been, mass protests around the country, particularly on March 4th, that our organization was actually involved in, to protest against those budget cuts and hikes in tuition and layoffs to education workers. And so we've been actively involved in that and trying to say that the budget crisis shouldn't be solved on the backs of working people. It should be solved by making the rich pay in big business. And we've also been really involved in building the anti-war movement through organizing a number of student strikes and walkouts against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and against the bailouts of Wall Street. And so as I said, people can check out our newspaper, Justice, and there's a literature table outside with our newspaper and a lot of other literature and a sign-up sheet for anyone who's interested in finding out more about our organization or reading about our ideas. You can check out our newspaper. You can sign up. You can talk with some of our members outside about setting up a time to meet up and talk more in depth about joining. And you can also check out our website, socialistalternative.org. Now, in terms of the format of tonight's debate, we're going to have an opening comments from both Keli and Ramy, and then responses from both of them. And then there's going to be a series of 4 questions, which is going to be one on healthcare, one on unemployment, another one on immigration reform, and the last one on bailouts and capitalism. And again, I really ask people to let the speaker, we're going to have equal time for both speakers to be able to answer the questions and respond to each other's answers. And then after that, we're going to open it up we're going to have about a little over 40 minutes for discussion, for audience questions and comments that can be directed to the questions to the speakers and also comments. And at the end, we'll have some closing statements. And again, just as I said before, I really ask the format of the discussion is people need to raise their hand because there's going to be a lot of people who want to speak, I'm sure, and I'll be sure to I'll call on as many people as I can, and people need to just to wait to be called on and speak, and we can have an orderly discussion. So with that, without further ado, we're going to start the debate. So, which is something really missing in our society. There's not enough vigorous debate. So I just really want to thank again both panelists for being willing to do this. So we have a 5-minute opening statement. 7 minutes.
7.
From Ramy and then from Keli. So 7 minutes each.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for being here. It's really great to see everyone taking out their time on their Saturday to be here. And I also want to thank Keli for agreeing to participate in this debate with us today. If we look out around our world today, there is one crisis and one disaster going on after another. And I want to start with the British Petroleum deepwater oil platform that just exploded in the Gulf of Mexico 2 weeks ago, where 11 workers were killed. And this may turn out to be potentially the worst industrial environmental disaster in U.S. history. And I did some research on British Petroleum that's starting to come out now that I want to share with everyone here to to know more of the facts. In 2009, British Petroleum spent approximately $16 million lobbying the federal government, which ranked it among the 20th highest political spenders that year. And the year before, British Petroleum spent $10.4 million in lobbying and ranked in the top 10 political spenders in the oil industry, spending approximately $530,000 during the federal elections. And there was a good article in the Wall Street Journal about how British Petroleum has been working to lobby the federal government with all this money they're spending on the candidates to urge them not to impose mandatory regulations. Instead, they were saying they should just voluntarily comply with safety regulations. They didn't need the federal government to impose mandatory regulations on them. So in September, BP was one of several oil companies arguing to the U.S. Minerals and Management Service, that's the federal agency, the MMS, that stricter regulations were not needed because the company could voluntarily comply with safety rules. And then the MMS studied more than 1,400 offshore incidents and found that those incidents led to 41 deaths and hundreds of injuries between 2001 and 2007. And many of them, the MMS found, were linked to factors such as communication failures, a lack of written procedures, and the failure of supervisors to enforce existing rules. The MMS proposed that they should have mandatory requirements on the oil corporations to reduce the number of incidents, which would have replaced the system under which many safety procedures had previously just been voluntary. But British Petroleum's vice president for the Gulf of Mexico production, he wrote a letter saying that while BP, quote, is supportive of companies having a system in place to reduce risk, accidents, injuries, and spills, we are not supportive of the extensive prescriptive regulations as proposed in this rule. We believe the industry's current safety and environmental statistics demonstrate that the voluntary programs have been and continue to be very successful. So you see here British Petroleum saying that they're monitoring themselves just fine, they don't need government regulation. And actually what ended up happening, unfortunately, is the federal regulatory agency, the Minerals and Management Service, they actually went ahead and gave BP an exemption from having to have safety plans in place. Like what they should have had is they should have what's called a blowout scenario, so that if there happens to be a blowout like the one that just happened 2 weeks ago, they already have a plan in place, ready to go to deal with the crisis. Instead, the regulatory agency gave them a free hand and said you don't need to have a blowout scenario plan. And now we are seeing the repercussions of this. 11 workers died, and the oil is now approaching the Louisiana coast and it's hit islands already. So you see how the regulatory agency is under pressure from this big corporation as well as other oil corporations, and they failed to do an adequate job to protect the environment. And it's not just British Petroleum. There's been hundreds of other oil companies that have also had their safety regulations waived by this government regulatory agency. We also know what happened in Exxon Valdez. They had a huge oil spill, I believe in the late 1980s, up in Alaska, and they fought for years to tie up the lawsuits that they were facing in courts. Years went by where they never paid a dime to clean up this massive oil spill. You know, they hired all these high-powered lawyers. They have all the money in the world to hire lawyers to fight it in the courts, and they refuse to take responsibility for their giant oil spill. We also recently, unfortunately, suffered one of the worst mining explosions in decades, where 29 miners were killed. At the Massey Mine Company in West Virginia, at the branch there where the coal mine exploded, they had the worst safety violations of any mine in the last year. And they also had over 1,300 safety violations since 2005. So this is a mining company that has a long record of breaking rules, breaking safety violations, and yet the government allowed them to continue. In my opinion, those 29 miners who died, there was no reason they needed to die. And if this mining company had such a horrible record of having violated safety regulations, they should have been shut down. And those workers should have been shifted over to some other company and get a living wage job that's a safe company. But unfortunately, our government has failed us. In fact, the Massey Company received a safety award. Despite their horrendous safety record, our government handed them a safety award. So what we see here, it's not just one company, one industry, or just having regulation. None of that would really solve the problems. And we have to ask ourselves, how is this possible? How do we have these huge disasters? We have all the technology of the world. Why can't we make it work? And I would argue that the problem lies in the way our society is structured. It's not just human greed of the CEOs. I don't believe. It's the way our system is structured. Under capitalism, businesses are privately owned, and some businesses outcompete others, and you end up eventually with these giant corporations which have immense capital, immense power, both economically and politically, and even they're able to lobby, both political parties, not only the Republicans but also the Democrats, and water down any attempts to regulate them, restrict them. Almost all the media outlets as well in this country are owned by only 5 corporations. So the corporations have the system sewn up. Under capitalism, actually Business Week reported that the richest 1% of the population now owns more than the bottom 90% of the population. When you have a so-called democracy with that kind of inequality, inevitably the richest 1% are going to control things, just like they did in the past under slavery, under feudalism. That's the kind of society we end up under capitalism. So we argue that we need public ownership and democratic control over these corporations. That's really the only way to get control over them. Regulation we don't feel would be enough, and we think the only real answer is public ownership of those giant corporations and putting them under the democratic control of all the people, not just the investors, but we think the corporations should be run by elected representatives of workers, consumers, and the wider public. And I'll have to stop there because I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramy. Now we have Keli for a 7-minute opening statement.
Okay, first I just wanted to say thanks to Socialist Alternative for being open-minded enough to have me here, because I do have to say that a lot of times liberals are quite intolerant, actually, in Seattle. So I think it says a lot about you for being so open-minded. So thank you, and thank you, Ramy, for inviting me. And I feel really lucky that we live in a country that we have the freedom to do this, and I think we're all probably very appreciative of this. First, I wanted to just take a minute or two to introduce myself, because I do feel like conservatives or Tea Partiers are kind of mythical creatures in Seattle, and because many of you may not actually know a real conservative, you might possibly buy into some caricatures or stereotypes about us. And so I would like to kind of just introduce myself. For the past 3 years, I've taught math and resume writing at a local nonprofit, private nonprofit, and we deal exclusively with low-income inner-city adults. We've got people who are, everything, on welfare, ex-cons, GAU, SSI, single mothers, food stamps, Medicaid, public housing, you name it, we serve them. And so my experience there has really informed my opinions on a lot of things in the public policy realm, because it's not just an academic debate to me. I'm not sitting in an ivory tower theorizing over some abstract concept of poverty. I deal with it every day, and I sit with people who cry in my classroom, and I hold their hand, and we talk about things. And I will tell you that these people do not want any more government assistance. They want opportunities to grow and to get out of poverty. And so, just so you know, that's what I deal with every day. That's my life. I also do improv theater. And so most of my friends for the past decade have been on the complete other side of the political spectrum from myself. And the thing that it's taught me and what I wanted to bring here today was what I mentioned at first, which is to view your political opponents as good people. Because I actually know progressives and I'm friends with them and we go to happy hour together and I do plays with them and I love them, I don't look at them as malicious, evil hate mongers that want to destroy society. Totally disagree with them on policy, but I know that they're good people and they come from a good place. And so I hope what you will take away from today is, disagree with me all you want, but the next time you see a Tea Partier or a conservative, have the decency to you get to choose. choose to assume that they don't have malice in their heart, that they come to the table wanting to also do good, but they have a different prescription for the ailments of society. So that's one of my big purposes in coming here today. My remaining time, I would like to talk about the nature of rights, because I believe that that is the biggest chasm between collectivists and individualists and socialists and capitalists. Rights are a moral concept, and they are the link between the moral code of the individual and the legal code of society. Individual rights are the only way to subordinate society to moral law. And if you look at throughout history, including today in various places like Venezuela, Greece, California, even, there has always been this push to lift society above the moral law that individuals are required to follow. And when you make the individual, when you empower the individual to be the one that makes the decisions, then you can stamp out that drive that a collectivist sort of mentality has towards tyranny and authoritarianism. The concept of a right is simply the freedom to act. It is the freedom of action. That's all it is. It's the freedom from physical compulsion, coercion, and interference from another person. And by the same turn, an individual's neighbor possesses that same right to action and freedom from coercion. And there's only one way, an individual's rights are violated when he or she is compelled to act against his or her own judgment or forced to expropriate his or her values. Then the only way you can compel someone to act against his or her own judgment is by force. So I ask you, can you intellectually, emotionally, and morally accept a system that depends solely on force simply to exist? There are political rights, and I don't believe there are economic rights, because I believe that to have one, you cannot have the other. In order to enforce economic rights, you must destroy political rights and freedom of the individual. So I don't believe they can coexist. Capitalism is the only system that protects the individual's right to action, allows freedom from coercion and compulsion, demands there be voluntary consent of all participants in any transaction, and provides the right incentives and opportunity for anyone wishing to reach for their dreams. Therefore, capitalism is the only moral system, as it combines prosperity with freedom and upholds the rights of the individual. I'd like to read a quote quickly. If some men are entitled by right to the products of the work of others, it means that those others are deprived of rights and condemned to slave labor. Any alleged right of one man which necessitates the violation of the rights of another is not and cannot be a right. No man can have a right to impose an unchosen obligation, an unrewarded duty, or an involuntary servitude on another man. There can be no such thing as the right to enslave. Capitalism empowers the individual to rise above, like I said, the tyrannical and authoritarian impulses of the collective, and to be generous and charitable with their bounty, to take care of the needy of our own volition rather than by some diktat. It gives us each the power to make our own destiny and to help our neighbors. And to me, capitalism is truly the system that allows you to say power to the people.
Beautifully said.
Okay, well, thank you. So we have a 5-minute response from Ramy and then a 5-minute response from Keli. Go ahead, Ramy.
Okay. Well, socialists, we are also in favor of freedom for people and individual liberty as much as possible. The only thing is, the place where we draw the line is when one person's individual freedom infringes on the freedom of another. If one person likes to swing their baseball bat and they're hitting someone else's head, then that's a problem. And so, but other than that, we think people should be free, and